consultations on the topic of the job description for Toronto's next Chief of Police. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that as participants joining together virtually tonight, we're coming together on land that is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. A few notes on the purpose of this and other sessions that we're conducting with Toronto area residents and other stakeholder groups. Just go to the next slide, please. Environics Research has been commissioned by the Toronto Police Services Board to undertake broad public consultation to define the qualities and characteristics for the job description for the search for Toronto's next Chief of Police. We're here so we can hear your feedback from residents and other stakeholder groups on this important topic. This process will contribute to the creation of an evaluation framework for those identifying, interviewing, and vetting candidates for the job. As part of these consultation discussions, we will not be identifying, vetting, or appointing any candidates for the post of Chief of Police. And we're not here to influence broader policy discussions and decisions currently before the Toronto Police Services Board or the City of Toronto. Just a quick look at our agenda for the next 2 hours while we're here together. We're going to spend just a little more time discussing the process for our discussion this evening. Then we'll jump into a conversation about issues. During that time, we'll ask people to participate both by using the chat function on Zoom, but also putting your hand up so we can call on you and people can have an opportunity to address the plenary. Depending on how many people show up this evening, we'll break into smaller groups so that we can have more concentrated discussions on the qualities, characteristics, and traits that are important to Toronto residents in the next Chief of Police. And then there'll be a period where we report back to the plenary, we hear each other's ideas and priorities, and we take the opportunity to create a small poll where everybody can vote and prioritize qualities according to what's important to them. We'll have a little time at the end to discuss the overall process through which a new Chief of Police is appointed to the Toronto Police Services, and a few minutes to wrap up before we get just a few more minutes of sunshine before the end of the night. A couple of terms of engagement, terms of participation while we're all here together this evening. Just asking people who address the group to try to limit distractions, background noises when you're speaking to the group so we can hear what you're saying and concentrate on what you're sharing. I mentioned this earlier, but again, just as a reminder, we're inviting people to participate through comments in the chat function. Which hopefully everyone has found at the bottom of their screen. If you roll your cursor, a little a function bar should come up at the bottom, and you'll find the chat function there. It's also in the participants. Oh no, that's the raise your hand function is also, if you click on participants, you'll see that function there. You can use that and we'll call on you if you'd like to contribute a comment. We welcome passion in this discussion. It means that this is important to you and we welcome that. We don't welcome personal attacks, foul language, or any kind of disruption of that nature. You will be removed by our technicians and not permitted to return to the discussion if that occurs. Your participation in this conversation this evening is anonymous and voluntary. I will call on you using whatever name you've put in as your username. It need not be your real name, that's fine. And no comments that anybody offers will ever be attributed to you specifically in any reporting or synthesizing of what we're hearing back in these discussions. Because there are so many people participating in these conversations and who have important and many things to say. We are timing oral comments. I have a timer, and after 2 minutes, we'll be muting people who have comments. You'll have an opportunity to put your hand up again, but that's just in the interest of being respectful of everybody's time and giving everybody an opportunity to weigh in on the topics this evening. And finally, the session is recorded. We keep that recording at Environics for our review of the discussion and our recollection. This discussion is also being broadcast on the TPS YouTube website, and a recording is also available at that website. You can see that later. A couple of points about the broader consultation activity in anticipation of some questions about that this evening. The various phases of this public consultation process, we're in the first now, which is involving 4 large public forum discussions with residents across the city. This is the third of 4 discussions. We've heard from residents of downtown Toronto, Etobicoke, and we'll be hearing from residents of North York next week. There's currently a survey also available on the TPSB website. The URL is there on your screen. It's open until May 13th. Many of the same types of questions that we'll be discussing this evening, but if you or anyone you know would like to add your voice to the survey, that is available online, and we'll share the URL again at the end of the conversation in case you don't get a chance to note it down now. In addition, there will be approximately 23 other discussion sessions with key stakeholder groups across the city, including community organizations that represent underserved and equity-seeking Torontonians, youth groups, elected officials, Toronto Police Service members, different city advisory committees, and the city's business community as well. One more note, it looks like we may have enough people to go into breakout rooms when we get to that part of our discussion. When that occurs, the breakout sessions are not broadcast on YouTube. So if anybody is watching us on YouTube right now, you will only see a screen that says that we'll be back shortly. And in fact, our groups will report back from those discussion sessions, but during the period that we are deliberating in smaller groups, that will not appear on screen. Does anybody have any questions about the process and the details that I just outlined before we get into our conversation? I'm watching the participant list and looking for hands up. So if you put your hand up, I will see you and be able to call on you and ask you to unmute yourself. So please have a look for that function. And I welcome any comments or questions you have right now about what we're here to do this evening and the process by which we'll be communicating with each other. I don't see any hands up at the moment. That doesn't mean this is your last opportunity to ask a question. So what I'll do is proceed to the next part of our discussion. And if anybody does have a question, please feel free to raise it. The first question I'd like to begin with, and to get feedback from participants this evening, from residents, I'd like to understand what you consider to be the top issues that are currently facing Toronto's police service, whether those are specific to Scarborough, to the city in general. What are the top issues facing the police service, and ultimately issues that will be facing a new chief of police? Again, asking people to either type in the chat or raise your hands, and I'll be able to call on you and ask you to elaborate. My colleague Victoria is going to be typing on screen as well, so you can see that we are taking notes. I see comments coming into the chat. Thank you. Things like gun violence, crime, specifically shootings, robbery and assault. Anybody like to elaborate on that? If you put your hand up, I'll be able to unmute you and hear a little more detail. Lynn, your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Okay, I would say race issues is a major issue.
Can you elaborate on that, Lynn?
Well, people who feel, I don't know how to put it, but people who feel that their issues are being ignored as a member of a group, and that perhaps they are even picked on by the police as members of a visible minority or majority.
Great, thank you very much, Lynn. I see other comments coming into the chat. Controlling the police budget. Jamal, if you'd like to elaborate on that, please put your hand up, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Mental health professionals as first responders. Mental health is an issue coming up. Again, please, this is our opportunity to hear from you. Jamal, thanks for putting your hand up. Please go ahead.
Hi, yes. It just seems like we are never able to control the police budget, and all of the other budgets in the city seem to always be under constant pressure except the police. And there's never any meaningful conversation or discussion to see if what we're spending on is actually the right priorities for the city. If money should be better spent instead of policing on perhaps diversion, or even if that money being spent for having the police respond to certain issues would perhaps be spent, be better spent with other agencies and having those agencies respond to those issues instead of the police.
Great, thank you so much, Jamal. Thanks for that. Asfar, your hand is up. I'm going to ask you to unmute, and please go ahead.
Thank you. I think one of the biggest things is connectiveness with the community. I don't know if connectiveness is a word actually, but being connected to the community, especially with the youth, in a way that makes them a part of the community, but also has a play in crime deterrence.
Great, thank you so much, Asfar. Thanks for that. Urban Res Solutions, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening. I would just like to dovetail. Sorry about that. I'd like to dovetail off of what the last person said in terms of just the community engagement and bettering the community engagement and then actually starting it and beginning it with some of the traditionally marginalized communities in the city.
Do you have an example of what better engagement means to you?
Not just reactive, but proactive. Obviously, a lot of policing is reacting to what happens, but there's still opportunities to be able to create meaningful rapport and relationship that hopefully will garner some sense of cultural shift that should happen within the police.
Great, thank you so much. Daylon Taylor, you're next. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I think one of the top issues facing Toronto Police Services is the lack of modernization by way of being reflective or representing and responding to the needs of communities. I feel like they're still stuck in the archaic way of doing policing, and the transition has not kept up with what's happening in society.
Can you give an example of that? Just so we're all thinking of the same thing.
So, for example, in terms of how policing is done, for example, we're talking about crime and responses to crime. There's still the interpretation of policing where you can spot the criminal on the side of the road and they have a certain look, a certain makeup, a certain characteristics. When we're talking about the sophistication of crime now, that it's beyond that. And so the focus then on certain races, certain or a particular race or certain individuals fitting a certain characteristics is what constitute criminals. And those are the person who get persecuted or, over policed for that matter. When there's a broader place and space for policing in communities that include providing some semblance of support or integrating some semblance of support, whether it be through policing or with other organizations.
Great, thank you very much. Just looking over the comments in the chat here, I see a reference, more MCIT units are needed. Just trying to help Victoria keep up with comments there. Better accountability, I see, if anybody would like to speak to that and discuss in a little more detail what that means. Interference from political bodies, which restricts good policing. Again, if anybody's inclined to elaborate a little bit on these chat comments, we'd love to hear from you. I see Juan, you have your hand up. Go ahead. Juan, I asked you to unmute. Are you able to do that? All right, sometimes we just work out some technical issues. I'm going to ask Dana. Dana, go ahead.
Hi, yes, I just wanted to elaborate on the concept of having nurses or other mental health professionals be the first responders for mental health calls. Because, yeah, just speaking from personal experience with a family member with a mental health issue who has been in handcuffs every time he has a manic episode, which is very hard for him. And he, like, I think every time I read about these really negative interactions with police and people suffering mental health crisis, a lot of times these people are really scared of the police, and including my brother. So if the police could be in the background, great. If they could be in the background, plain clothes, just there as like a security guard is in a mental health institution, and the people talking to the person having the crisis are trained and professionals, then I think we'd have much better outcomes.
Great. Thank you very much, Dana. I think Victoria is working to keep up with some comments on the screen. I'm just looking at hands up here. Sorry, I'm just trying to read, and if I mispronounce, I apologize. Advanasurish, go ahead. Are you there? I've asked you to unmute. All right, we're just getting our hands around the technology, so we'll sort it out. Ah,
Yeah,
there you are.
my viewpoint is that crime in all its forms is totally out of control in the city. And you just have to look at the news to make that observation. And one of the reasons for that is I think that there are no consequences to committing crime. And the police are not able to do their job because of politically correct politicians and overactive social activists, et cetera, and therefore, as long as there are no consequences, then there is no disincentive to people that wish to commit crime.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hector, go ahead, please.
The one issue that I'll bring up that I know my community would want me to talk about is race relations specific to the Native community. Sorry, the Native Canadians. I know that it needs to be called out specific and different than other races. Like I'm BIPOC myself, but I know that they deserve very different treatment, and we need to be very careful, very attentive at how we move forward with them.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm just keeping up with the participant list. Juan, let's try you again. I've asked you to unmute. Please go ahead. Okay, thank you very much. We are looking for people who want to be here and contribute to this discussion this evening. Crookshanks.
Hi.
Hi,
I
please go
think one of the big issues in our policing today is I play in identity politics or pressure from politicians to play into those identity politics, and I think it stands in the way of good policing and competence. So that's a big issue, and I can see city councilors or politicians of all kinds trying to play this politicization of police, and I think it's unnecessary and very basically counterproductive.
Understood. Thank you very much. I'd like to move on to another question and ask what words would you use to describe the Toronto Police Service today? If you could choose some words, and again, asking for people to use the chat, but to please do so in a respectful way for people who want to be here and want to contribute in a constructive way to this conversation. We'd like to hear from you. What words would you use to describe the Toronto Police Service today? Please feel free to use the chat. Okay, overfunded. I see overarmed, behind the times, unaccountable. Anybody with a hand up who'd like to comment? Transphobic, work in progress. I'd like to understand what that means. Doing a good job. Trying hard to please everyone. We're working hard to remove people from the discussion who are not contributing in a constructive way. So I thank you in advance for your patience. We're working to do that. Hit and miss. If you'd like to elaborate a little bit more on that, what that means specifically. Anybody want to put their hand up and have any thoughts about what? Okay, Jamal, I see your hand is up again. Please go ahead.
Hi, yes, I said unaccountable. So there are like the last comment, there are some really great police officers, but there are, and I've dealt with this personally, there are a lot of bad police officers. Like people that they can't be reformed. They just should not be police officers. They're dangerous to the public. They're dangerous to their colleagues, and they just make it harder for people to trust the police, because what a lot of people, there are good officers and there are bad officers, but it just takes one bad experience with an officer for people not to trust the police. And when I'm approaching an officer, or when a racialized person or a transgender person is approaching an officer, you can't tell if this is a good officer or a bad officer. You just know that there are some bad officers, and they are rarely held accountable for their actions.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for those comments. Asfar, you're next. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I think I agree with a lot of what people are saying in the chat. I think the best term for this is non-proactive. I'm like making up my own words, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Like non-proactiveness. I think that might be the best. Toronto Police has been very reactive, in which is the case where I think some community members only see one side of the Toronto Police. And if they were, more boots on the ground, walking the beat instead of driving around in their cars, they could get to know, the police in a more personal level. And then the police will also get to know the community in a personal level, create relationships where we don't see, the militant and like law enforcement person behind the badge. We actually get to see a person behind the badge.
Understood. Thanks very much, Asfar. Thanks for elaborating on those comments. I see things like overburdened with politicization, strong police union. Firaz, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Victoria, Jody, and everyone for facilitating this tonight. My comments really speak towards the fact that as a number of the callers have alluded to their interaction with the Toronto Police Service, as someone who was part of a racialized community and working in communities that are at risk, the biggest thing for me is with Toronto Police Service in terms of, you have to speak to the core of what needs to be changed, and it's the culture of policing. And someone alluded to the modernization of the force. I think we're just not there. And the former Chief Saunders, had some ideas about things like that, and it remains to be seen whether or not that's going to bear any fruit. But I think the culture of the organization needs to be looked at a granular level in terms of how the organization is. As the gentleman alluded to earlier, good cop, bad cop. I mean, that can be said for any organization and any kind of business or organized group that we're involved with. So I just think that it's about the culture of the organization, and we need to look critically about what are the important elements of the organization of the police service that is going to be responsive to the community needs. Thank you so very much again.
Thank you, Firaz. Thank you for your comments. I'd like to move on to another question related, but we've talked about some words we'd use to describe the police services today. I'd like to know what words you'd use to describe what you'd like to be able to use to describe the police service 5 years from now, for example. So looking out into the future, how would you like to be able to describe the police service? I noticed a hand up, and I'm sorry that I didn't get to you. So if it's about this question, Charanjit, please go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks again for this forum. I think I would like to see the police more connected with communities, have cultural awareness, and not operate from a top-down approach, but really be from bottom up. I've been working in the community for a number of years, and we've really built good relationships with some officers. Growing up in Scarborough, I felt bullied by a lot of officers in my communities, but some officers I did come across were great. So again, I echo a lot of the comments folks were saying, that it really just takes some bad apples to ruin the bunch. And I also just want to acknowledge the comments, someone spamming the comments, is that the police have to deal with people like that, right? The police they're really put in a hard spot, a rock and a hard spot, and they got to deal with a lot of the troubled characters and individuals in our societies that we don't get to see day in and day out. So I really acknowledge and respect the work that they do that a lot of us don't have to put up with. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of share that. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you so much, Charanjit, and thanks again to everybody who's in the discussion and hanging in with us as we try to get on top of those inappropriate comments and remove those people from the discussion. So thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for your continued comments here. I see Victoria is keeping track of them on her slide. Looking forward to the future, culturally sensitive, an ally. Helping troubled people instead of punishing them. Thank you for these comments. Again, if anybody would like to elaborate on these, I welcome you to put your hand up. Diverse. Thanks, Gemma, for that. Seeing a diverse police force, well-trained. Any other comments? Any other hands up? I'm just keeping an eye on people here. If there's anything that you'd like to contribute outside of the chat. Equity for communities, anti-Black racism approach. It's great feedback. Thank you very much. Humane, A lot of people said accountable. That came in quite a few times. Thank you for that. We're going to get ready to move into our smaller group discussions. We'll have a chance to talk about these things in greater detail. Given the size of our group, I think we're just going to break out into two groups. I'll lead one of the discussions, and Victoria will lead the second discussion. Oh, I'm sorry, I see hands are up. It's not appearing on my screen. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the hands up here. Maybe, G. Scott, go ahead.
Well, thanks for somebody helping me figuring out.
I don't. You didn't show up on my list, so sorry about that.
You know, frankly, I'd reiterate a lot of what was already said, but I do think at this juncture in history and at this juncture for the city and the province and the country, it's probably pretty important that the new chief, is somebody of a diverse background, likely a visible minority, somebody who knows what it's like being in that in those shoes, which can be great in those shoes and can have some challenges depending on the journey they're in. But I think that's pretty important, and my gut is that as a consequence, it probably should be somebody that's in-house that knows the complexity of the city. There's probably a instinctive reaction to go outside, but it's a complex thing. Somebody pointed out the challenges. This is a fantastic example of the microcosm of the challenge. Whoever just made the comment that the very fact that there's been some spamming with the aggressive language in the chat is just dead on with respect to how difficult it is with the police, and they have to handle some difficult situations. So I think most of these comments I full-heartedly agree with, and I just think we probably must choose somebody from a visible minority background. And my sense is it's hopefully there's a candidate that fits that mold that's already there, that knows the city, and that's also capable of budgeting, because that's important, and capable of prioritizing and really being community focused. Because the key, I think, and I think this trend is fortunately irreversible. I think in all elements, whether it's mental health or other issues, we're moving much towards prevention than we are penalization. And not that there shouldn't be justice, but if we can get ahead of the curve and prevent things from happening through partnerships in the community, and that's the attitude with respect to how, right from the chief all the way down. I'm not saying, in fact, I would say Chief Saunders and before him Bill Blair had that attitude, but you've got to take that all the way down to the officers that are on the street. And if we get that right, we're going to solve a bunch of issues that we'd otherwise have. So
Great.
Thank you for letting me give my couple minutes.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks very much. So yeah, now that I saw some other people adding some comments to the chat. So thank you for that feedback. I think we are at the right point in our discussion to break into smaller groups. Our tech folks who are working hard behind the scenes are going to assign us to these groups automatically, so you don't need to do anything. You just kind of need to hang on, and Zoom will send you where you need to be. But before we do, just let's talk about a few aspects of the job description and the role of the chief that are kind of foundational. They're fundamental to what the chief does. And then we're going to talk about the kind of person, the kind of qualities that are going to help realize and fulfill these roles. So we'll talk about, I'll enumerate them here. They'll be available to you as well when you get into the breakout room. So the chief of police has to effectively manage $1 billion annual budget that centers communities, innovation, data, and technology. The chief has to prioritize, develop, and nurture partnerships with a broad spectrum of different stakeholder bodies, and you can see those there throughout the city. Leverage the partnerships to collaborate in the development of innovative programs rooted in community policing. The chief needs to have a deep understanding of the myriad and complex challenges facing policing organizations internally and externally. including strengthening member wellness and engagement, increasing public trust and legitimacy across communities, particularly those that are vulnerable, marginalized, and disaffected, and lead both the frontline uniform and civilian support staff to ensure the TPS is a sought after, positive place of employment. So those are kind of the basics or the fundamentals of being the chief of police. So like I said, our tech folks are going to now assign everybody to one of two. It's a random assignment, one of two discussion groups. We'll meet you there and we'll talk in a little more detail about the qualities and characteristics we think are going to be important in the next chief of police. And then we'll come back here to this plenary and we'll be able to hear what each other prioritized and then even vote on it and see what we come to as a group. Welcome back, everybody. We're back in the plenary. I think we're all here. So we had some time to be in breakout rooms and talk a little bit about the characteristics that we're looking for in the next chief of police that are important, that are going to help them address the issues that came up earlier in our discussion, and also lead us toward the vision that we articulated when we were choosing different words. So I'm going to ask Victoria if she's able to put her deck back up on the screen so that she can take notes based on our two different conversations, and we can add the qualities and characteristics on the slide before we vote on them. And if people would like to elaborate or comment on what we're seeing on the screen, I'm sure we'll have an opportunity for that. Victoria, would you like me to go first and report back from our group?
Sure.
All right, so I'm going to our slides. So our main themes, we came up with 4. It was not easy. There was lots of discussion, but I did my best to synthesize things. So the first theme is, and it's a trait that's very outward facing. So it's somebody who's a people person and a good communicator. That they're very linked in the sense that someone who's good with people and communication is part of that. So a people person or communicator. Our next theme was somebody who is a consensus and a relationship builder. So this is someone who's able to build consensus among stakeholders, but part of that consensus comes from the fact that that person is able to have meaningful relationships with those stakeholders and those communities with whom they are trying to build consensus. And by the way, I invite anybody from Group 1, if I'm not articulating these the way you'd like, feel free to put your hand up and we can hear more. Our third theme that came out of our discussion was somebody who has a community lens and experience. So the lens is obviously informed by community experience. We had an interesting discussion about whether the next chief of police needs to be somebody who is from an equity-seeking or a visible minority group. And in general, the group didn't really feel strongly about that, but they did want the candidate to have a diversity lens that came from experience within the community, within various communities, and that was demonstrated. And our last theme is somebody who is humane and compassionate. So there was a bit of a discussion around empathy, that empathy isn't necessarily the right word when it comes to somebody who influences policy and brings that to the table, but instead compassion for groups who are represented through the various policies. So those were our main themes that came out of our discussion. I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, so we had 4 main themes that came out, very similar conversations. So the first one, I'll add them to the screen momentarily. We had committed to active community engagement. Type and talk at the same time. Then we also had accountable. So I know you spoke about that one there. We had a change maker / enthusiastic. So the enthusiastic part was important to add to the change maker piece. Someone who's excited to be in the role, someone who's excited, someone who's going to make changes, but is excited to make those changes, and is ready to be active in the role. And then last but not least, we had leader / well-rounded. So someone who can lead by example, we discussed, but well-rounded in understanding the different needs of the officers within the service and the communities that they're serving. So a leader on both fronts.
Great, thank you for that. I'm wondering if now that everybody's seeing what came out of these discussions, if there's anything you'd like to add or discuss or provide any additional context, whether it was from my group or Victoria's group, about what is intended by these different leadership qualities and characteristics, why they're important. If anybody wants to put their hands up, have any feelings, or if you want to put it in the chat, why these things are, why you felt these were important, why you might have advocated for them in your group. Charanjit, go ahead.
Yeah, like the common theme I'm seeing is like someone who's very compassionate, humane, and someone, you know, has charismatic, good communication. And it's almost like we are looking for almost like a Care Bear that's a leader. But I think we really need someone, because I think the major issue with policing in communities is power dynamics. There is a large amount of certain ethnic groups that are over-policed and over-incarcerated as opposed to others. So we really need someone who can recognize this and really work within a lens that's anti-oppressive, anti-colonialist, and really can disrupt any of those powers that are systemic and are targeting specific ethnic groups. So we really need someone who's strong in that character and can really work towards building an ethnic police force, or not ethnic, but like a diverse and an equitable police force. Okay. Because Toronto has probably the most languages living together in the world. So if we're gonna live like that together with all this diversity, we really need someone who can recognize that and operate from that lens. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you, Charanjit. Thanks very much. Dana, I see you next with your hand up.
Yeah, this wasn't in my group, but I was quite taken with the enthusiastic comment, because yeah, I agree that would be, I think, a dream of mine to have a police chief that was not, you know, making changes or listening to the community begrudgingly because he or she feels like they have to tick some political box, but that was really, yeah, enthusiastic and passionate about making a police force that works for and with the community. And somebody who is not, I guess, who is kind of like, I don't know how to say this, really confident and strong enough to be able to open up a discussion about how policing can be different, rather than just kind of bristling at the very suggestion. I feel like policing is just like any other public service. And if we're going to be able to make cuts to education and other departments, we should at least be able to talk about it, but without it getting so heated and defensive. So it would be nice to have somebody that is really keen to make this policing work in Toronto. So I like the enthusiastic one.
Great. Thanks very much, Dana. Asfar, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm just like shadowing or reiterating what everyone else had said. I think one of the most important ones, at least to me, I work with youth at Big Brothers Big Sisters of Toronto, and something that I've heard from them was that community connected is not there, and whenever they are interacting with police, it's just like because they're in trouble and nothing, like, you know, it's never anything good. So I think a police chief that really focuses on on youth and connecting with the youth in the community that they work with is something that is super important.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Urban Res, please go ahead.
Yeah, and I think in terms of just equity, what we have to stress that is that people who don't have that or don't recognize it seek it, right? So I think understanding it and understanding the importance of it for several communities, and that we cannot be blind to obviously just the calls of either be racism or discrimination or bias that several communities across Toronto have often stated. So acknowledging those, understanding those, and then working towards a more equitable society where policing is, excuse me, hopefully anti-racist, unbiased, and undiscriminatory, or would be the ideal. So I think working towards that is someone we would definitely want to see in office.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I just want to check in with our tech because as we were discussing this, they were preparing a poll for us. Lynn, I see your hand is up, so let's hear from you and then we'll be ready to vote.
Just a quickie, having taken university courses, I think it's rather odd that we never defined the word policing. We never said, to differentiate it from social workers or whatever, but and police do feel that they are enforcers, and we have and they don't want to do other stuff. They're not there for other stuff. They're there to enforce the law, and they get very upset when the judges throw things out of court, etc. But we never defined the word policing.
Understood. Thank you so much. Thanks for that perspective. It looks like we're ready to go with our poll. So we'll do some voting and then we'll have more of an opportunity to chat about those results. You'll see it should have popped up on your screen now. So from the list below, and these are all the traits and characteristics we came up with together. So now as an individual, we're not working in small groups anymore. Now as an individual, please go ahead and vote. We're asking you to pick your top 3, let's say. What are your top 3 most important qualities or characteristics in Toronto's next chief of police? If you can only pick 3 from this list, please pick yours. And we'll see the results. We'll give everybody a couple minutes to do that. And then when we're finished, we'll look at the results together. But this is the list we created together. Have a look, give it a read, and choose your top 3, please. Still waiting for a few people to log in their votes, so we'll give you another half a minute there. We'll wrap up at 2 minutes. So make your choices. What are your top 3? What are the most important characteristics and qualities that you believe you'd like to see in Toronto's next chief of police? What's important in that job description when that decision's being made and candidates are being vetted? What's important? Let's just take another few seconds to see if we can hear from everybody on this poll. Okay. All right. So we'll close the polling so we can see what came out at the top and other results as well. Okay. So that orange line is is our top response on the screen. So committed to active community engagement was #1 by quite a long shot here. 85% of us chose that among our top picks for characteristic. So Victoria is capturing that on a slide, and we can talk about that. Other ones that had high percentages, accountability. So someone who's accountable, that's important, 40%. And having that community lens and experience is also one of the top picks from this group. Oh, you know what? I'll throw in that change maker, that enthusiastic change maker as well. It came out at 35%. So I'm curious. So Victoria's captured those. I'm going to stop sharing the results, but those results have been captured in our system, and they're anonymous, by the way. Nobody's results can be attributed to them specifically, but thank you for everybody who voted. I'm wondering if anybody's got any comments or observations based on the top themes that we've chosen here. Are these qualities going to contribute to ensuring a successful next chief of police when it comes to executing on that vision that we talked about, addressing the issues that came up at the beginning of our discussion that are so important and top of mind these days? I'm curious about thoughts. Asfar, your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Hey, so being the police chief, I think there's going to be a lot of challenges, and you're never going to be, you're never going to be that. You're never going to please everybody, but I think keeping these 4 sort of things in mind, sort of as a filter on decisions that you make in your role as a police chief, I think this should be pretty helpful, I think.
Great, thank you for that. Anybody else have any comment? Is anybody surprised by these? Are you surprised that these came out at the top? Do you think anything's missing? Again, please feel free to use the chat, put your hand up. We're happy to hear from you. Yacinda, go ahead.
Hi, good night. So I think just one thing that I wanted to add that I didn't mention before is that I think the chief would need to be very strategic. As somebody pointed out, obviously you're never going to make everybody happy, but you still want to be able to at least make sure that people's needs are being addressed, even if everybody isn't totally happy with all that they were able to receive. And also, in terms of being a change maker and coming in, I mean, it's great in terms of, what it can produce in the future, but it also does tend to upset the status quo, which can come with other ramifications and a lot of pushback in a lot of different areas. So I think that the chief would have to be very strategic in terms of how they present the change that they want to make, when they present it, and the effects that can come from doing so, even though it is very necessary, just has to be very strategic about it.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks for that. Jamal, your hand's up. Please go ahead.
Hi, just to sort of piggyback on that last comment, it's great to be an enthusiastic change maker, but in order for a police chief to make the changes that he or she wants to make, you need the community behind you, and you need your officers behind you. So I think they kind of go hand in hand. I mean, you could propose all these ideas, but unless the community feels actively engaged in your ideas, that they've been properly consulted, that they understand them and they understand the need for them, you're sort of going to be moving a boulder uphill.
Okay, thank you. And I see some other comments in the chat as well about the importance of community engagement. So thank you very much for that. Faraz, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I actually I guess, lost my connection. So I was out for a good chunk of the breakout session. So guys, great job. No, that's like a great job on that list. Just very briefly, not surprised, obviously, at the 80% on the community engagement side. Quite surprised that that we didn't get more on the accountable side. Just to speak to what the last two speakers had to say, I think I agree. I mean, listen, while we would love to have a fabulous chief who is a change maker and all that, that chief needs to be invest in the community. And obviously have that engagement with the community such that the community buys into it. And going back to my earlier comment about culture of the organization, I mean, that chief needs to be able to really steward the culture of the organization to such an extent that the rank and file of the organization is actually going to support the changes that the chief would like to bring. This is much like, again, it may be a stretch, but this is not much different than putting in a new prime minister, putting in a new president. I mean, you have a whole organization that you need to get on your side to have changes made. So I just want to say that the team did a great job, and I'm so sorry I wasn't able to participate. And thank you so very much.
Well, thank you for those comments. That's great. That's very helpful. Anybody else who would like to, Crookshanks, I see you in the chat, and some concerns about the language of community. I don't know if you'd like to elaborate on that at all, but defining community and making sure that that's clear when we're vetting a candidate for their commitment to community. So if you want to put that in the chat or put your hand up, we welcome any elaboration on that. Anybody else, if anybody is surprised that something either made this list or didn't make the list, again, an assurance to everybody that what we heard during the breakout sessions and even prior to the voting, that's all been captured. So it's not lost just because it didn't make it into the top, but we're very curious to understand why things do rise to the top in certain discussions, and when people feel as though those selections don't necessarily match what they prioritize. So we welcome comments either with your hand up or in the chat on that topic. And I'm just scanning, so I'm sorry if somebody's got their hand up and I don't see them, but I'm taking a look. Maybe what we'll do now, and I thank everybody for their participation in that process. It's not easy, and reaching consensus is not easy. So thank you for being part of that. Let's talk a bit about the process by which a chief of police is appointed in the city. We've got some information on that here. And then I'd like some feedback from people who are here tonight to understand how they feel about this process, any questions you have about the process, what you think the public should know or hear about this process as it's unfolding, because it is currently underway. And we're currently at stage 1. So the board has contracted with Environics Research to undertake these public consultations, and we talked a little bit at the beginning about what this part of the process consists of. So our public forum meetings, the online survey that's available to residents, and then a subsequent number of discussions that will happen with different community organizations and representatives across the city who have relationships with the police service and want to weigh in on this process as well. So that's taking place now. The board has also engaged an executive search firm who, once the job description is prepared with feedback from these conversations, the executive search firm will use that job description to search for qualified candidates for the post. Anyone who's interested and who meets those qualifications will be able to apply. So that's step 3 of this process. And then it's up to the board to shortlist and interview the candidates that meet the characteristics on the job description and who have potential to fill that role. And finally, from that shortlist, the board appoints a successful candidate who becomes the next chief of police. So in a nutshell, that's the process that is unfolding now. again, I'm curious, does anybody have any questions about that? What would you like to know? What's it important for the City of Toronto to know, for residents to know as this is unfolding? Gemma wants to know, did we at least state that the police chief should be from Toronto? So that's a good question. I can say in my group, in my breakout session, I asked that question, and it was not considered a top priority for a candidate. Some people felt that yes, there are nuances to Toronto and to its various communities, and having had some experience in Toronto is important, but it wasn't necessary to everybody, and others thought that there could be candidates from other municipalities and urban centers who would bring something to the process. So if anybody else would like to weigh in on that discussion, please go ahead, but just to respond to Gemma's comment there. What else, what do you want to know about the process? What needs to be shared? Does anything need to be shared with residents as this process is unfolding? What's on your mind about this? Again, hands up or in the chat so we can make sure we're answering your questions. Lynn, go ahead.
I'm just wondering how well advertised this has been throughout the city, because I found it online, but I'm wondering if it's been in the newspapers, etc., magazines like Maclean's.
And Lynn, sorry, you mean these consultations, or do you mean the process to find a new chief?
Yes, the process, and particularly the meeting we're having tonight and the other meetings that there have been. Has it been well advertised? Will people come out of it in the city feeling that they have had a chance to participate? I think a lot of us may feel, oh, they don't want to hear us unless we're ready to present a paper. But, you know, has it been well advertised?
Okay, thank you for that question. Well, we've done a lot of work, and the Toronto Police Services Board has done a lot of work to notify different stakeholders in the city that this is happening. Advertising on social media, it's certainly been covered in the news. So so the intent has been to make it pretty broadly broadcast, and of course, anybody who's interested in viewing these sessions but haven't had a chance to participate can see them on the Toronto Police Services website, the YouTube channel, sorry, the recordings are there. In addition, there is the survey that's on the website, the Toronto Police Services Board website, where residents can go and continue to have their say until May 13. So this is not the last opportunity for residents to participate in that process. Jamal, your hand is up.
Yes, so I would just like to echo Lynn's comments. One of the major issues we deal with in Scarborough is two issues, actually. Not everyone speaks English, and not everyone has access to Wi-Fi. So, and those, people that often fall in either or both of those categories often don't have their voices heard. And another thing I would like to be interested in knowing is how are like the marginalized voices in our societies being heard? So I'm thinking, people with disabilities, people who suffer from mental health, sex workers, those groups that aren't that for whatever reason don't feel like they can participate in the process or aren't comfortable in the process. How are their views being incorporated into this process?
Thank you. Those are great questions. As I mentioned at the beginning of the process, after these public forums, there are specific stakeholder meetings, conversations with community organizations who represent many of the groups, Jamal, that you just listed, and who themselves are members of those communities. So inviting them to the table to represent those communities in those conversations. And I will say about Wi-Fi and virtual participation, the way we're doing it tonight, it is unfortunately a byproduct of the public health crisis that we're in right now. typically there would, in a public consultation process, there would be some in-person opportunities, but of course that's just not possible right now. So online is certainly the safest. There have been some instances where we've communicated with people by telephone as well, but we understand that all of these methods have their limitations. So doing our best with that. But thank you so much for those questions, and I see Victoria's taking lots of notes. What kind of things do you feel that that the city that needs to be shared publicly during this process? What do residents want to know? What should be shared with Toronto residents? What is the police union's role in the selection? Service members are going to participate in this consultation, just like the other stakeholder groups that we've listed. So we will be consulting with members of the service. Kayla wants to know the makeup of the group who selects the chief. That's the board, the Toronto Police Services Board. It is their role to select the final candidate, to appoint the successful candidate. Sorry, I just saw a hand up and I'm afraid I missed it. As far, go ahead.
Hey, I think something more about, after the selection, I think the community should probably know sort of the history of the candidate, or maybe the candidates, the shortlist at least, so you can know what the background of those candidates are, what kind of experience they have, just as public information, so they know who they may be getting as a police chief.
Okay, why is that important?
I think they want to know as a community, we never get to know the police chief, I think, right? And we just sort of see them as this figurehead. So getting to know them more in more about the history and more about who they are might make us feel a little bit more connected.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you. Michaela, how diverse is the board? The board members and bios are available on the Toronto Police Services Board website, so you can go see there who sits on the board and how that answers your question. Anybody else? What should be shared? This is a recruitment process, so some people may be interested in knowing early on who's interested. Others might think that's not appropriate when somebody's applying for a job and they maybe don't get it, that could be an issue for them. Dana, what's your thought on that?
I'd like to know, I put it a couple of times in the chat. I'm very curious to know, is it possible to see exactly which groups, these stakeholders that the police board or whoever is meeting with? Yeah, because even groups, I'd like to know if they're meeting with like Black Lives Matter and maybe even, the defund the police movement. It'd be nice to be reassured that they're at least listening to the perhaps, more controversial or confrontational views, but these are strong views. And I think it would be like a lot of community and trust building if these groups were invited to the table.
Okay, that's important to public trust then, Dana, from your perspective?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. M, your hand is up.
I was going to say something very similar to Dana, actually. I think that if this person is going to be accountable and going to be committed to building community connections and stuff, then a really important part of that is like off the bat, showing that the board is taking the considerations of those groups into account to add to the list. I think Jamal mentioned earlier, sex workers, unhoused people, Indigenous community, urban communities, all like those groups should all be consulted in the way that we are being consulted now. And then sort of going back to what I think it was Michaela who said, like, who sits on the board. It's fair enough that the makeup of the board is like on their website or whatever, but I think if there's like information sharing that's going out, something about that should be included within it, because I don't think there should be an expectation that people have to go and then look up on a website who's made this decision. It can be like a summary of who's making the final decision on the candidates.
Okay.
Would be a useful thing to have easily understandable and accessible.
Okay. Why is that important to you? Why should that be important to the public?
It's important to me because part of the reason there hasn't been accountability up until now is because the same people have been appointing the same kinds of people. And I would like to see a change in that. I would like to see people saying, this is why we made the decision. This is the context in which we're making the decision as individuals, and to hold themselves accountable to that, to be open to criticism, because we can actually see what the decision-making process is and who the people are who are making the decisions, so that we can ask questions and counter it and be involved in the process actively.
Understood. Thank you so much for that. Anybody else on what's important to share with the public? What's important to know as this process is ongoing before a decision is made? How are you going to know when the appointed candidate is named? How are you going to know that they satisfy the qualities, characteristics, things that we discussed tonight, and that they represent what Torontonians and stakeholders have said is important to them in the next chief of police? What kind of evidence do you need? How are you going to know that that's taken place? Jamal.
If someone was going to say that they're committed to accountability, and this police officer was from the police force, I would like to see them, publicly reveal their records, their disciplinary history, just like any other profession. Lawyers, you can look up their disciplinary history online. Teachers, doctors. I'd like to see someone sort of make that, take that step and say, here are my records, and to start opening up the process in terms of like who's being appointed and what this person's background is.
Okay, thank you very much. Dana, go ahead.
I think I'll know that we might be on track for the kind of police chief that we've identified here when I hear the opinion of some of these stakeholder and community groups and people who are directly affected by policing, more so than myself, is a little bit removed from it all. Yeah.
Is that like an endorsement, Dana, or what? Is that like an endorsement from those groups? What would you be looking for?
Yeah, something like that, or just what they have to say about it, because as someone who's not interacting with police on a daily basis, and certainly not in an antagonistic kind of over-policed way, I rely on the opinion of those groups to see if we have maybe found the kind of police chief that will engage with community and rebuild trust.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Lynn, go ahead.
I watch the agenda on TVO, and they often have panel discussions about just this kind of thing when such a major decision is made. I also guiltily watch CP24 and CBC at night, the news. And quite often they will bring on groups to say, what do you think about, or they'll interview people on the street. And I go by that to quite a degree.
Okay, great. So some publicity about the
media
in the media. Okay, great. Urban Res, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's inevitable that any police, officer who's made their way to be chief, and that's the way it usually happens, hasn't had interactions with the communities. So the communities will be able to say, yeah, I remember this guy or person or whomever it may be, to say, yeah, they're great, or they weren't so good, or they obviously had a track record of something. So I think literally the proof is in the history of whatever they've done in the past.
Okay, thank you for that. Crookshanks.
And sorry.
I think.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Urban
Go
Res,
ahead.
I'll come back to you in a second. Go ahead, Crookshanks.
I just, we shouldn't forget the obvious, the job record or resume of the person, and the lists the accomplishments.
That's something you're going to want to see once they're appointed.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on that, Crookshanks? No. Sorry. Back to Urban Res. You had another thought. Did you want to?
Yeah, just said that. I wanted to say, that's a part of the listening too, right? The community, and then whomever is going to be appointing this, if it's a board or a committee or whatnot, has to listen to the community also. So it has to be a collective action partnership to bring about the communication that's going to be required to even move forward. So listening at this point is imperative.
Okay. Anybody else on how you're going to know if it's the right candidate, if it's the best candidate, if it's the candidate who represents the kinds of things that we talked about tonight, that we'll talk about with the that the board has done what it said it wants to do in terms of having a comprehensive and thorough search that's transparent and accountable, so that Torontonians can see their feedback in the final candidate who's appointed. What advice do you have for the board at this point, or any final thoughts you want to share with them? Jamal, go ahead.
I would say to be transparent. Let us know how the decision was made. People don't necessarily have to agree with the decision, but if they think the decision-making process was fair and it took everyone's views into account, they can live with it. But if it's sort of just presented as a fait accompli and people don't know how the decision was made, they don't trust how the decision was made, and these kinds of activities, which are really important, people become jaded and they're less likely to participate in the future because they think my voice doesn't matter. They're just going to do what they want to do anyways.
Okay. And let me ask, so far, in terms of the information that's been shared with you about how the decision is being made, do you have enough information now, or is there something else that you need?
I mean, I'd actually like to see how, like, once they get to the decision-making process, like how are they, like, what are the criteria that they're looking for? Are they looking for someone that's accountable? What do they define accountability as? What do they define transparency as? Are they looking for someone who's willing to release their, disciplinary records? Are they looking for, someone who's actively committed to community engagement? What do they mean by that? That's what I'd like to see.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Jamal. Faraz, please go ahead.
Jamal is reading my mind. I hope he's going to play the lottery tonight. Incredible. I mean, exactly what he said. The reality of it is that if the board can demonstrate that this is a fair, equitable process, that it was wide enough that it captured all the voices of Torontonians, as has been articulated earlier by so many people, like make sure everybody who is interested has a say. And then if the board has a very clear kind of process that is, again, transparent, and they can release that about here are the things that we look for in the chief. Here are the key character traits and experience, and here is our thought process around each of these categories, how we define them, and then more importantly, how the successful candidate met these categories. I think, as Jamal said, I mean, we are not all going to agree on things, but at least we'll say, okay, we gave everybody a fair shake, we get it, and then people are willing to, I think, take a leap of faith on that. So, I mean, fabulous points there, and I think most Torontonians would say, okay, that's cool. Let's see what happens.
Great, thank you very much for that. Lynn, go ahead.
It's me again. I'm wondering. I'm wondering how much the rank and file police officers are being approached by Environics or anyone, because she's going to be the leader of them to the community and vice versa. How much, because having worked with them again for 25 years, I know that as soon as somebody's appointed, You get the, oh, I can't stand them. Oh, how could they do that? And then you get the ones that, oh, yes, he gambles with me and drinks with me. I think he's wonderful. How much are they being approached?
Well, there will be similar sessions to the ones that we're doing now with service members as part of this whole process. So I hope that's an answer to your question. There's an invitation to any service member who'd like to be part of these conversations, and we look forward to hearing from them as well on these same questions. Anybody else? Any other advice to the board? I've heard things like making sure the process is fair and equitable. What does that mean? How will you know that the process was fair and equitable? Why is that important? Just curious if anybody has any thoughts, either with your hand up or in the chat, making sure that we're capturing these thoughts and this advice for the board as well. So they've got this, Dana says, don't be afraid to engage with your critics. Okay. I think we might have had a few of them tonight, no? Joining us. Anybody else? Any final thoughts, final advice to the Toronto Police Services Board on this very important process that you're clearly all passionate about because you came and you spent a couple of hours with us this evening, for which we are extremely appreciative. So if that's the case, I'll just, I will just take us to our final thoughts, and thank you so much for your time this evening, for your candor, for your honesty, for your patience as well. Oh, I see, Lynn, you've got your hand up one more time. Go ahead, Lynn.
Oh, I just like to interrupt. I'm Irish. But I want to thank all of you who are behind this, especially you and Victoria, for allowing us to do this, and for being so patient and calm.
It was a pleasure. It's a pleasure to hear from you all, really. Dana, go ahead. You got your hand up.
I just wanted to thank everybody who took part, even though it was clear that some of us were coming from pretty different places in our, attitudes about policing and who the next police chief, what the next police chief who should be. I think everybody was really respectful. I mean, with the exception of the person who drew a penis on the screen while I was talking about my mentally ill brother. Besides that,
I'm sorry for that.
I thought it was really, no, it's fine. I thought everybody was, just really respectful of each other's differing opinions. And I was actually quite pleasantly surprised by that. I don't know what I thought was going to happen, but I just want to thank everybody for, listening respectfully and treating everybody, with respect.
Great. It's been wonderful to have you. Thank you so much. You guys have taken the words out of my mouth, but I really do appreciate you having taken the time with us this evening. Just a reminder that on the screen here that there is the survey. If you still have more to say after tonight, or if you have thoughts over the next few weeks as this process continues to unfold, there is a survey that's open to the public, and please share this with others who you know who may also be interested in weighing in on this important process. On the TPSB website, you can see the URL there, and even if you just go to tpsb.ca, you can find public consultations, and it'll take you quite easily to the chief discussions and the survey that's there for your feedback. So with that, I'm going to wrap us up for this evening, and thank you all again so much for your contributions, and wishing you a good rest of the evening, safety and good health, and be well, and thanks again.